Gentlemen, let's talk about a dangerous misconception that's quietly sabotaging men across the globe, the belief that ignoring her will make her want you more. The idea that silence equals strength, that withholding attention equals power. But the truth is far more nuanced. Else so many men have been misled into believing that ignoring a woman automatically makes her want them more, that pulling away without explanation or context will create some irresistible magnetism. But the reality is far more complex and often damaging. Ignoring her isn't always a move rooted in self-respect or confidence. More often than not, it's a subtle form of emotional immaturity dressed up as strategy. When you ignore a woman out of frustration, rejection, or a bruised ego, you're not demonstrating stoic strength, you're revealing emotional fragility. You're acting out of reactivity rather than grounded masculinity. And that distinction is everything. A man who is truly emotionally mature doesn't resort to disappearing as a way to manage his inner conflict. He doesn't punish her with silence when he's feeling insecure. But many men do exactly that, often without realizing it. They retreat, not because they're centered, but because they don't know how to face emotional discomfort. Instead of communicating honestly, they vanish. Instead of expressing how they feel hurt, disappointed, unsure, they shut down, and when this happens, it sends a very clear message to the woman: I can't handle emotional tension, I don't know how to stay present when things get real, I'll disappear instead. That's not strength. That's avoidance. When a man ignores a woman without emotional clarity, it breeds confusion, insecurity, and resentment. It doesn't inspire attraction. It creates emotional chaos. Women are deeply intuitive. They can sense the difference between a man who is silent because he's calm and sure of himself, and a man who is silent because he's anxious, uncertain, or trying to manipulate. The former creates mystery, the latter breeds mistrust. And that mistrust will slowly eat away at whatever connection may have existed. Silence without integrity becomes a weapon. It becomes a way of gaining control by withholding emotional presence, and this tactic never leads to respect. In fact, it does the opposite. It communicates to the woman that your emotional availability is conditional, that you only show up when things are easy or when your ego is fed. When she makes a mistake, pushes a boundary, or expresses something you don't like, you don't respond, you retreat. You don't engage, you disappear. Over time, this erodes the foundation of emotional safety. She no longer feels like she can trust you to stay emotionally available during tough moments, and so she adapts. She begins to guard herself. She mirrors your emotional inconsistency. She stops being vulnerable. She learns not to depend on you for anything meaningful. Even worse, ignoring her in this way can create a toxic pattern in the dynamic. The more you ignore her to get a reaction, the more she feels compelled to chase you just to feel validated. It becomes a push-pull game where no one wins. You might get temporary attention, but it's not the kind that builds a lasting connection. It's fear-based, it's anxiety-driven, and eventually it burns out. She will either emotionally exhaust herself trying to figure out what she did wrong, or she'll snap out of it and walk away entirely, often without looking back. There's also a dangerous irony here. The very thing you're trying to avoid, losing her, becomes more likely because of your silence. By ignoring her, you may think you're protecting yourself from vulnerability or rejection, but what you're really doing is sabotaging the very connection you claim to want. Women don't feel emotionally safe with men who vanish when feelings get complex. They don't feel adored by men who use distance as a way to maintain power. and they don't stay loyal to men who constantly make them question their worth through absence. The real power doesn't lie in how long you can ignore her. The real power lies in how deeply you can remain emotionally present, even when things are uncertain or uncomfortable. That doesn't mean over-explaining or begging for attention. It means standing your ground with calm, honest communication. It means expressing your boundaries without punishing her. It means taking space if necessary with clarity, not with coldness. Ignoring her out of confusion or emotional weakness may feel safe in the moment, but it leads to a cycle of distance, distrust, and disconnection. And if your goal is to build or sustain something real, that cycle is the fastest way to destroy it. Female attraction doesn't operate on logic the way many men assume. It doesn't follow neat, predictable patterns based on what should work. Attraction, for women, is deeply emotional, fluid, and rooted in the experience of connection. When there's emotional momentum, when a woman feels engaged, excited, curious, and seen, her desire grows. Her emotional investment deepens. But the moment that emotional current is disrupted by extended silence or cold detachment, the attraction doesn't stay frozen in place waiting for you to return. It begins to unravel. Women are constantly responding to how you make them feel, and when you go silent, especially without warning or meaningful reason, what they feel is confusion, self-doubt, and eventually emotional distance. Many men mistake absence for power. They think that pulling back will make her chase harder, that ignoring texts or withholding attention makes them more desirable. But what often happens instead is that emotional momentum, what keeps her thinking about you, daydreaming, wondering what you're doing, and associating you with excitement or intimacy, grinds to a halt. Her brain starts to rewire itself around your absence, not your presence. She begins to forget how it felt to be connected to you. Instead of being a daily emotional reference in her life, you become a mental afterthought. That's not creating mystery, that's creating disconnection. The thing about women is that emotional energy is not static. It doesn't stay in one place waiting for your next move. If she was previously engaged, feeling emotionally alive and connected with you, and you go silent without context, she has no choice but to adjust, and in adjusting she begins detaching, not always dramatically, not always with anger. Sometimes it's quiet, calm, and unannounced, but it's real. She begins to shift emotionally away from you and toward other sources of emotional fulfillment, friends, family, work, social media, or even other men who offer the kind of emotional consistency you withheld. That momentum you once had becomes a distant memory. Even if she had strong feelings for you, even if she once adored everything about you, emotional detachment happens when presence is replaced by prolonged absence. And once that momentum dies, it is incredibly difficult to reignite. It's not just about reaching out again after days or weeks. It's about the fact that during your silence, she created new emotional associations. She stopped linking you with warmth, fun, safety, or romantic energy. She started to see you as someone unreliable, inconsistent, or emotionally unsafe. That shift is subtle but powerful, and it usually doesn't reverse just because you decide to come back around. Now, some men will argue, but I just needed space, or I was trying to see if she'd chase me. But the truth is, space without communication creates anxiety, not desire. Women don't chase emotional vagueness. They chase emotional resonance. If she doesn't know what you're thinking, why you disappeared, or where you stand, she doesn't feel mystery. She feels destabilized, And no emotionally mature woman will allow herself to stay in that emotional fog for long. She'll seek stability elsewhere. She'll prioritize her peace over the allure of a man who disappears without warning or explanation. This is why emotional momentum is everything. It's the difference between a woman who thinks about you constantly and one who slowly forgets why she cared in the first place. It's not about texting her all day or overwhelming her with attention. It's about being consistent in your emotional energy. It's about making her feel emotionally safe, seen, and engaged, even when you're not physically present. That kind of presence doesn't always require words, but it always requires intention. When you allow emotional momentum to die by going silent, you lose your position in her emotional world. You may believe you're giving her time to miss you, but if she associates your absence with confusion, hurt, or disappointment, she's not missing you. She's mourning the emotional inconsistency. She's recalibrating her expectations. She's adjusting to life without the emotional stimulation you once provided. And once she adapts, it becomes a new baseline. From there, your return doesn't feel like a relief. It feels like a disruption. A return to uncertainty, and in that space her heart closes off. Not because she stopped caring, but because she had to. So if you're relying on ignoring her to build attraction, understand that you're not creating space. You're breaking emotional continuity. And emotional continuity is the glue that holds female desire together. Without it, desire dissolves. No matter how powerful the connection once was, it will fade. Not because she's fickle, but because women are wired to protect themselves from emotional instability. If you interrupt the flow long enough, she won't be angry. She'll be indifferent. And once a woman becomes emotionally indifferent, there's nothing to chase, nothing to win back, nothing to reignite. That's the risk of killing emotional momentum. It's not that she'll hate you, it's that she'll forget why she ever loved you. There's a common misunderstanding among men when it comes to women's emotional tests. A lot of men take them personally. They see them as attacks, manipulations, or irrational behaviors. But in truth, many of these so-called tests are a woman's way of asking an invisible question. Are you stable enough to handle me at my worst? Will you stay emotionally grounded when I feel insecure? These aren't games, they're emotional checkpoints. And when a man responds to these moments by ignoring her, ghosting her, or becoming emotionally unavailable, it sends a very clear and damaging message. I can't handle emotional discomfort, and I won't show up unless you're perfect. That message doesn't make her chase you. It makes her close her heart. Women test for emotional strength, not weakness disguised as dominance. And ignoring her when she expresses something emotional, frustrating, or even irrational isn't strength, it's avoidance. A woman may push your buttons, act distant, or create tension not because she wants to fight, but because she's trying to see if you'll collapse under pressure. Will you get reactive? Will you go cold? Will you disappear? These behaviors are often rooted in past experiences. Maybe she's dealt with men who couldn't handle her emotions. Maybe she's been punished with silence before. So when you do the same thing, ignore her in the moment she needs to feel emotionally safe, you validate her worst fears. She doesn't see you as a strong man who can hold space. She sees you as another man who checks out when things get real. And here's where the damage begins. When you ignore a woman during a moment of emotional vulnerability, even if it comes out as attitude, sarcasm, or tension, she stops trusting you. Not just in that moment, but long, term. She starts learning that you're emotionally unreliable, that you don't show up when it matters. And even if you return later acting normal, the emotional rupture has already taken place. Her nervous system remembers the abandonment. Her subconscious remembers the punishment. She may still talk to you, sleep with you, even act like everything is fine, but emotionally, something in her pulls back, something shuts down. Now let's be clear. Emotional tests aren't about tolerating disrespect or chaos. You're not supposed to be a doormat. But emotional strength means you know how to hold your frame * without * running away. It means you can assert your boundaries * without * emotional shutdown. If she's being disrespectful, you address it. If she's projecting, you calmly point it out, but ignoring her completely, giving her the cold shoulder, acting like she doesn't exist because she said or did something you didn't like. That's not maturity. That's emotional regression, and it teaches her that your affection is conditional, that she only gets your presence when she's perfectly pleasant, never messy, never complex. This creates a dynamic where she no longer feels safe being her full emotional self around you. And that's the beginning of the end for deep intimacy. Because when a woman can't be emotional around a man when she feels like every expression of her inner world might trigger punishment or abandonment, she stops being feminine around him. She becomes guarded, masculine, self-protective. She starts filtering herself, and in doing so, the emotional and sexual polarity begins to fade. What once felt magnetic starts feeling robotic. The connection dulls. Not because she doesn't care, but because she doesn't feel free. Men who misunderstand these emotional tests often lose great women. They think she's too emotional, or she's playing games, when in fact she was offering him a chance to show up as a grounded leader. A moment to rise above reactivity and demonstrate calm presence. But instead, they choose silence. They choose absence, they choose coldness, and in doing so, they teach her that vulnerability is dangerous, that emotional honesty will be met with retreat, that if she expresses a need, a fear, or even a messy emotion, the man she's trying to connect with will vanish instead of hold space, and so the relationship shifts. Slowly, quietly, but deeply, she starts sharing less, laughing less, reaching out less. She starts building a wall where she once built a bridge. And the tragedy is, many men never realize this shift has occurred until it's too late. Until she's emotionally out the door. Until she no longer looks at them with softness. Until she's emotionally numb, because she had to become that way just to protect herself from the inconsistency of a man who couldn't stay present when she needed it most. So when she tests you, she's not trying to ruin the connection, she's trying to find out if it's real. She's asking, can you hold me when I'm not easy to love? Will you be emotionally present, or will you punish me with absence? And if your answer is silence, coldness, or disappearance, then you haven't passed the test. You've only proven that her fears were justified, that even the man she wanted to trust doesn't have the emotional maturity to stand tall when the waters get rough. And once she knows that, she stops swimming toward you. She starts swimming away, quietly, without drama, without warning, because in her heart the emotional test has already been graded, and your silence failed it. When you withdraw your attention, thinking that silence will elevate your value, it often has the opposite effect, especially when your silence feels like a punishment rather than a boundary. See, a lot of men believe that by pulling back, they are commanding more respect, more attention, and more emotional investment from a woman. But what they fail to realize is that women are acutely sensitive to emotional tone. They can tell when your silence is not rooted in peace or healthy self-respect, but rather in retribution, when your withdrawal comes across as a calculated way to teach her a lesson. It activates her emotional defense system. She stops seeing you as someone safe and steady. She starts seeing you as someone who punishes her emotionally for making mistakes, and that breaks trust on a deep level. When your silence is perceived as a tool for control, it's no longer powerful, it's threatening. It's no longer alluring, it's unsettling. Instead of drawing her toward you, it pushes her away because it sends a subconscious message. My presence is conditional. If you upset me, I'll disappear. If you express something I don't like, I'll remove my warmth. And once a woman feels emotionally punished by the man she's opened her heart to, she begins protecting herself. She pulls back her vulnerability. She filters her words. She stops being soft, expressive, and emotionally available because she now associates those qualities with the risk of being shut out. That's how emotional distance creeps in, not in loud fights, but in quiet hesitations, in a shift of tone, in her reluctance to share what she used to tell you so freely. A lot of men confuse this kind of silence with setting a boundary, but a real boundary doesn't come with emotional punishment. A boundary is clear, honest, and rooted in self-respect, not ego. For example, saying, "I need space right now to clear my mind, I'll reach out when I'm centered," is a boundary. But disappearing for days without explanation, just to make her feel uncertain or to force her to chase you, that's emotional punishment. And what that teaches her is dangerous. That your love is a transaction, not a gift. That she has to earn back your attention by walking on eggshells. That if she ever displeases you, she risks being emotionally exiled. And when that pattern repeats, when silence becomes your go-to response to conflict, disappointment, or even small emotional requests, she begins to adapt. At first, she might try harder. She might overextend herself to get your attention, apologize for things that aren't her fault, or become overly accommodating. But eventually, she will burn out. No woman can thrive in a connection where emotional withdrawal is used as a weapon. No woman feels secure with a man who makes her feel like affection is something she has to constantly earn. So over time, she stops trying, not out of rebellion, but out of exhaustion. She goes quiet not to mirror you, but to protect herself from your pattern. And that silence, that's the one that doesn't come from ego or pride. It comes from emotional survival. In a healthy dynamic, silence can be sacred. It can create space for clarity, growth, and emotional grounding. But that only works when it's communicated and rooted in maturity. When your silence comes out of anger, hurt, or a desire to manipulate even unconsciously, it becomes a form of emotional neglect. And women, don't forget how you make them feel during those moments. If she feels abandoned when she needed understanding, if she feels like you left her emotionally out in the cold, just to prove a point, she won't chase you, she'll change. And when a woman changes because of how unsafe your silence made her feel, the intimacy between you takes a hit that's hard to recover from. What most men miss is that influence isn't built through power plays. It's built through consistency, through emotional steadiness, through showing up the same way whether she's at her best or at her most insecure. Influence happens when a woman knows she can be all of herself, flawed, emotional, passionate, imperfect, and you'll still remain grounded. You won't punish her with silence. You'll guide the situation with masculine presence. But when your love feels like a reward and your absence feels like a threat, you become the very thing she cannot trust. And trust, once fractured, is incredibly hard to rebuild. So instead of reaching for silence as your first move, ask yourself, Is this about protecting my peace? Or is this about punishing her? Is this silence coming from clarity or from spite? Because if she senses that your withdrawal is meant to hurt her, not help you, she may never fully feel emotionally safe with you again. And emotional safety is the foundation of her feminine openness, her sexual desire, her loyalty, her softness. Once that's gone, it doesn't matter how much you come back later with gifts, apologies, or attention. If your influence came from emotional punishment, you didn't build respect, you built fear. And fear doesn't inspire devotion. It inspires distance, quiet, steady, irreversible distance. There's a dangerous myth in the world of dating and relationships, the idea that by making yourself scarce, you automatically raise your value. That by pulling back your energy, your attention, your presence, you somehow become more desirable. While in theory, scarcity can create attraction, in practice, it only works when there is something emotionally meaningful to miss. If you've never made a deep impact on a woman, if you've never given her something real to remember, then your absence doesn't create longing, it creates emptiness. Silence isn't magnetic if your presence wasn't powerful. That's the brutal truth most men avoid. Ignoring her doesn't raise your value unless she already values who you are. If she doesn't feel emotionally connected to you, your silence doesn't spark intrigue, it sparks indifference. Many men operate under the illusion that being unavailable is the same as being you. They think that the less they text, the fewer emotions they show, the colder they act, the more desirable they become. But this only works if a woman has already formed a deep emotional attachment. If she hasn't, your absence just confirms what she subconsciously suspected, that you were never really invested, that you weren't serious, that you were emotionally vacant. She doesn't become more curious about you, she becomes less interested, because in the early stages of connection, women aren't just looking for a man who can go silent, they're looking for a man who makes them feel something powerful before he steps back. In today's world, where women are constantly flooded with distractions, messages, and superficial attention, you have to understand that being absent is not impressive unless your presence was unforgettable. If you've never made her laugh deeply, if you've never made her feel emotionally safe, if you've never challenged her in a respectful way, if you've never awakened something inside her that made her pause and think, "He's different," then your silence does nothing. She has no emotional anchor to hold on to, no memories worth replaying. You were just another guy who talked for a little while and then disappeared like so many others. And the reality is, most women today are emotionally armored. They've seen this pattern before. They know how to detach before you even get a chance to leave. So if you haven't created something memorable, your power move of ignoring her is actually just a quiet exit from her mental space. You can't weaponize distance without emotional substance. The mistake many men make is thinking that pulling back is a strategy, when in reality, it's the emotional impact of your presence that determines how effective your absence is. If a woman feels seen by you, understood by you, emotionally awakened by you, then yes, she will feel your absence. It will stir something in her. It will create curiosity, maybe even longing. But if you were emotionally flat, vague, or guarded when you were around, she doesn't miss you, she forgets you, because she doesn't crave silence, she craves depth, and depth doesn't come from being cool and unavailable. It comes from being emotionally intelligent, from knowing when to lead, when to listen, when to speak, and yes, when to take a step back, but only after you've left a mark. Think about it this way. You can only withdraw something if you've already made a deposit. In relationships, the deposit is emotional resonance. It's the way you made her feel when she was around you. Did she feel excited? Did she feel safe? Did she feel challenged in a way that inspired her to grow? Did she feel like she was discovering something new, not just about you, but about herself? That's what makes a woman emotionally invested, not your ability to ignore her, not your cold silence, but the moments where she felt alive, seen, understood, or even slightly off. Balance in a way that stirred her feminine energy. If you skip this step, if you try to go straight to ignoring her without first creating that depth, you're playing a losing game. You're assuming that withholding attention will create desire, but the truth is that it only creates desire if she already perceives your attention as rare and valuable. If your attention meant nothing, your silence means even less. So many men ghost after a few interactions and assume the woman is devastated, when in reality she's not even fazed, not because she's cold, but because you never gave her something to hold onto. You left no emotional fingerprints. You were just a ghost before you even disappeared. Real value isn't about being distant. It's about being impactful. It's about showing up with presence, depth, authenticity, and confidence, so that when you do pull back and when you choose to, she actually feels your absence in a meaningful way. She remembers your words. She replays your energy. She compares others to you, not because you ignored her, but because when you were around, you were unforgettable. So the question isn't, how do I make her miss me by ignoring her? The question is, what am I doing when I'm present that's worth missing? Because that's what separates the man she can't stop thinking about from the man she forgets by the end of the week. If you truly want to maintain your masculine power while protecting your peace and cultivating healthy dynamics with women, the answer is not to ignore her, it's to detach with presence. That might sound contradictory, but it's the most mature and emotionally intelligent form of masculine self-control. Detachment doesn't mean emotional abandonment. It doesn't mean playing games, withdrawing love, or using silence to confuse or manipulate her. It means maintaining your internal emotional balance, regardless of what she says or does, and staying grounded in your values, your peace, and your sense of direction. It means stepping back when necessary, not out of fear, resentment, or ego, but out of calm discernment. When you detach with presence, you are still emotionally available, still in control, still observant, but you are no longer emotionally entangled. That's the difference between power and punishment. A lot of men confuse detachment with indifference. They think being stoic means being emotionally cold, unbothered, unreachable. But real stoicism is not the absence of feeling, it's the mastery of emotion. Detachment with presence means that you can acknowledge what she's feeling, witness her emotional ups and downs, even hold space for her storms, without internalizing it or reacting impulsively. You're not trying to fix her, control her, or match her volatility. You're simply aware, alert, centered. She may be emotional, reactive, even testing you, but you remain composed. That presence, that calm, grounded awareness is what makes her feel safe, even when you take space. It's what keeps her drawn to you, even when you step back, because you're not running away, and you're not ignoring her to play games. You're protecting the integrity of the connection by refusing to participate in chaos. When you operate from this level of masculine centeredness, your silence doesn't confuse her, it clarifies things. She can feel that you're not withdrawing in bitterness, but rather stepping back because you refuse to escalate conflict or allow emotional drama to drag you into chaos. This form of detachment communicates strength, not fear. It says, I care, but I will not sacrifice my peace. I see you, but I will not lose myself trying to please you. That energy is rare and incredibly attractive, because what it does is create a polarity where she feels both emotionally safe and subtly challenged. She knows you're not trying to control her, but she also knows you won't be controlled. That balance, compassion with boundary, empathy with firmness, is what women crave but rarely experience. When you practice detachment with presence, you also stop needing external validation from her. You no longer base your worth on how quickly she texts back, how affectionate she is, or how often she gives you praise. Your emotional state is no longer tied to her approval. That is true freedom, and from that place of freedom, you gain the ability to choose how to respond instead of reacting impulsively. Maybe she pulls back. Maybe she gets moody. Maybe she tries to test your emotional strength. You don't flinch. You don't chase. But you also don't punish. You simply remain calm, assert your boundaries when necessary, and continue living your life with purpose. That's the energy that either draws her deeper into your world or filters her out completely. Either way, you win because you stayed true to your values without compromising your emotional integrity. Another dimension of detachment with presence is clarity. You're not vague, passive, aggressive, or cryptic. You communicate clearly. If you need space, you say so. If something isn't working for you, you express it with calm directness. You don't ghost, you don't play hot and cold, and you don't disappear without explanation. That's not detachment, that's emotional immaturity. When you're truly detached with presence, your clarity itself becomes attractive. Because most women are used to emotional inconsistency. They're used to men who either smother them with neediness or retreat completely with cold silence. But when you show her that you can care without clinging, speak without pleading, and walk away without bitterness, she experiences a new form of masculine energy. One that doesn't need her to behave a certain way to feel secure. Detaching with presence also gives you leverage over your own emotions. You start recognizing your triggers, your patterns, your ego-driven tendencies. You catch yourself before you spiral into overthinking, chasing, or reacting. You create space between stimulus and response. That's what separates mature men from impulsive boys. In that space, you gain the power to choose how to navigate the emotional terrain. Maybe she's acting distant. Maybe she's not validating you the way she used to. Instead of panicking or punishing, you observe. You check in with your own values. You ask yourself, is this woman aligned with where I'm going? Does her behavior reflect someone who values me? You no longer act from fear, you act from clarity. That is how real detachment serves you. It protects you from giving your power away to fleeting emotions and unstable situations. Ultimately, detachment with presence is the antidote to toxic dynamics. It replaces manipulation with maturity. It removes the need for games and replaces them with grounded leadership. It transforms your silence from a weapon into a sanctuary. It shows the woman that you're not here to control her, and you're not here to be controlled. You're here to lead, to love, to experience, but not to lose yourself. And that is the kind of man who doesn't just attract women. He transforms the way they relate to men altogether. Because, for the first time, they meet a man who doesn't ignore them to feel powerful, but who holds space, even in detachment, to remain powerful and present at the same time. So the next time you're tempted to go silent, to disappear, to ignore her as a way to feel in control, pause and ask yourself what message you're really sending. Are you acting from strength or from fear? From clarity or from ego? Because true masculine power isn't in your ability to vanish. It's in your ability to stay composed, intentional, and emotionally grounded. Detach when needed, but do it with presence. Pull back if you must, but never out of spite. Let your actions reflect self-respect, not silent revenge, because the man who leads with calm power, who chooses peace over pride, and who walks away with dignity, not manipulation, is the man who becomes unforgettable. And in a world full of noise, games, and emotional chaos, that kind of presence is rare. That kind of man is rare, be him.